Ladies and gentlemen, I know that people will be coming in from the Hayden Smith room and going into all the different exhibitions and coming back in drips and drabs. But I know that time-wise we're going to press on, and I hope you can appreciate that. There's still lots to come, our keynote speakers. We've got lots of networking to do. But first we have a father and son duo for you, and I have been practicing. Architectonicus Limited. I've got it. And I want to introduce you to William and to Roland McMorran, please. You come first.
Hello everyone, and thanks to June for inviting us to make our presentation today. Just a little thing, Emma Davies and Tim Smith at their presentation this morning said that their focus was looking after Shropshire's families, and in doing so were intending to develop health and care hubs. And I think what we're going to demonstrate this afternoon is a possible way of doing this, because today is about the use of technologies, and frankly, looking at everything that's been happening today, we are overwhelmed by technologies. But oddly enough, the oldest technology of all, which is the spaces we inhabit, hasn't changed much at all. So there's a lot of catching up to do, and Roland's going to start by explaining the background to what we're doing.
Hi everybody. So we are Architectonicus, and what we specialize in doing is looking at the way a building is constructed, the way the spaces relate to each other, not just from a fantasy perspective or based on old-fashioned models, but we look at the evidence behind how a building spaces and their meaning and the way those spaces are presented support people via research into cognitive bias, positive psychology, research into positive approaches to activity delivery and so forth, to make sure that people can move through spaces and integrate with each other and interact with each other in a very, very positive way with particular potential outcomes. And to run alongside such an evidence-based approach to architecture and design, we also look at the psychosocial model and the way the staff behave and how you can train staff in certain research backgrounds, again, positive psychology, strengths theory, relationship theory, and so forth, to support people to fully use and be part of an environment rather than environments working in the opposite way, controlling people. Instead, the people come in, the way they're welcomed and the way whatever activity happens there is done fully supports how those people feel and enjoy their day. So what you have, instead of any old environment and any old model of staff behavior, you have those completely supporting people to feel great about themselves, lifting their well-being and filling their life with much more positive emotions. Now, the clinical processes, clinically, we can solve most problems or support people at least to live as well as possible with any kind of issue they may be living with. But clinical models tend to get people to think continually about what is negative about what's happening to them. They take on a sick role. So if that clinical model, instead of simply standing alone, is properly supported by this wonderful psychosocial model of the staff integrating with them and interacting with them through different sorts of activities and so forth, and the environment itself supporting them to feel good and live well, that alongside the clinical model will ensure that that clinical model is very, very well interacted with by those people, and therefore they get the best benefits from it as quickly as possible. So you're saving huge clinical costs in the long term. That's quite well proven, especially for morbidities related to aging. So the key of having an evidence base is that you have an actual rationale for the service that you're delivering, which is therefore repeatable and in terms of the building especially recognizable. People see it, they know it's different from the usual, and they know that wherever they see that place, they're going to feel and experience a completely different thing from what they normally do. And that building makes up the affective theatre. That place that influences mood either positively or negatively, influences choice making either positively or negatively. It is like a theatre, a stage set within which that staffing and support model takes place. And therefore, because they're based on evidence, when you look at the reality of the service and whether you're getting the outcomes you want, you can refer back to those basic evidence bases and remanipulate the way they're communicated to staff, remanipulate the way they're used to inform the building and the structure, to alter the outcomes, improve them, or get what you wanted in the first place. So I'm going to rush through very quickly just to give you a bit of an outline of the ingredients that we put into these models, and then William is going to take you through the architectural side and what that can result in terms of spaces and some of the technologies that help that to be possible. So with a very broad brush, we all want to be to have this sense of freedom and create, and freedom is essentially creative. So something that's going to help people feel free involves creativity. It involves within that framework a flexible model for the staff to use the evidence that they've been trained in to interact with people in quite a free way. The way that people exist in the habitat and through their nature as a human being, and that then informs their sense of identity. So you can think of it as, say, the field of science and research is producing all these different ingredients that we can use, and the models that are developed to train the staff in and for the environment, we can take out ingredients that we know are going to create stress and anxiety for people. We can add in a whole rich field of ingredients that are going to help staff and people and teams in whatever way they're working introduce the causes of well-being into people's lives, introduce the causes of development of positive identity, positive sense of self, and look at the way in which people take on an identity for themselves through the choices they make, the actions that they undertake, and the way they then involve themselves, and the way opportunities involve them creates our sense of identity, is created through those experiences. And that happens, again, within this affective theatre, which, you know, we all know how despite however hard we work at delivering any particular service, the place that service is delivered in can really help us to do that amazingly well, or it can really hinder us and add friction to the service that we're trying to deliver. So it is important where something happens, just as it's important how that thing happens and how it's delivered within.
Thank you, Rolly. I went on a journey 2 years ago. It was a travelling fellowship sponsored by the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust to try and find excellent examples of what Roland's talking about, which is the integration of any model of support with the building which is in which that activity is taking place. I went to Canada, the Netherlands, and Australia in search of exemplars, and I can assure you they're very, very difficult to find. Now, I pressed the wrong one, and somebody said, press it again. There we go. Try that. Okay. I don't know if any of you can read plans, but the point is, these are examples of plans of buildings which I went to see. And it'll be apparent to anybody looking at these that essentially they are groups of rooms down very, very long corridors. And if you're providing support for people, one of the worst things to be is at the end of a corridor, isolated, and it's very, very hard to service that person and look after them well. And yet, these are plans of exemplars. Why are buildings like that? And why do we carry on building them? In the past, on the left, are examples of prisons, like Newgate Prison, on the left here. Yeah. And in the middle are sanatoria, places like Bedlam. And on the right are brand new buildings. They're identical, aren't they? We cannot carry on building buildings that are fundamentally divisive, isolating, and terrifying to their occupants. So, a wise man said that. think of the places which you love best, or places which are designed to support a certain function. We're in one now. We all know how a theatre works. There are different ways of doing it, but essentially it's always the same. But an example that I really love is the one on the right-hand side. It's a bit fuzzy, this slide, but the point is it's a child's playground, children's playground. Think of a children's playground. It's full of fabulous things to do. They're getting better and better as time goes by. It used to be just a seesaw and some swings when I was a kid, but now it's exotic, and you can go there with your kid and they have a wonderful time, and they can see everything at a glance. They can see what the other kids are doing. They can join in, or they can anticipate what they might do later. And while you're standing watching, you're making friends with the other parents or nannies and grands, standing looking. So it's a whole magical social experience. You would never dream of dividing up all the activities into individual rooms, down long corridors. You just wouldn't do it. So it's a fabulous example of a really useful space that creates social interaction. When I was abroad in Canada and in the Netherlands, I came across two absolutely superb examples of social support for vulnerable people, old people, some of them with advanced dementia. One's called the Dr. Beethoff Wellness Academy in Toronto, and one is called the Activity Centrum in Soest, which is a large town in Holland. Now, the one, just very briefly, the idea is that you have a very, very active day from just before breakfast time to just after the end of the day before you go back home. And it's busy, busy, busy all day. The one in Canada is centered on the concept of an academy, a bit like a university seminar room, but essentially it's just one space in which all these wonderful activities happen. And most serendipitously, there's this identical one which they don't know about each other, but it also happens in Holland, and it's a very rich experience. It's not so sort of academic based, but it is based on having a busy time. The one in Canada is based on right brain aptitudes, because the right brain is about emotional response, and it lasts longest if you have a dementia. If you thoroughly immerse yourself in artistic activities, it could be poetry, sculpture, music, anything, then it's something you can automatically respond to. And in the Netherlands, it was just the same. And in both places, quite spontaneously, the participants said to me, "I love it here, it's my home." So what we've tried to do is bring back that knowledge, and using the evidence base that Roland has just described to you, we've put together some projects in the UK. There are two. There's one down in Teignmouth. This is a project which provides this similar experience of having a very simple space. It doesn't have to be a large space, 70 or 80, 90 square meters. It's easily achievable. This one happened to be in a redundant local authority assisted living block of flats, and with a redundant daycare centre downstairs. So we were able to transform it so that every single corner of the space is for a specific use. And it's laid out so that use is obvious. And the folks that come can move from area to area and carry out and participate in a non-judgmental environment what they want to do. And we carried out a similar project, a pilot project in Bristol. This was in effectively the old science lab of a secondary modern school in Bristol. And once again, it's about 70 square meters of space, very, very carefully organized. The lighting, the colors, the types of furniture, the activities. So they were very popular, and most extraordinarily, because Roland was running one of these programs, they said the same thing. "I love it here, it's my home, I want to stay, I don't want to go home at the end of the day." So this is real, it actually happens, and the support people who make it happen love it too. It's deeply fulfilling, it turns care on its head, it becomes desirable. People were wanting to barge in on the day in this place to see what was going on. The number of volunteers which came far exceeded the people which actually participated during the pilot. So do you see, it's an enormously socially bonding experience. If that works for a day concept, why can't it work for a whole residential setting? And so here are some examples of traditional residential settings. On the left here, we've got the little community that we're familiar with in Iron Age settlements, and in the middle, these lovely clustered houses in Africa, and on the right, the folks up in North America living together. It's a natural way of being together in small social groups, not too big, because it all gets too complicated. So unfortunately, there's a tendency now in care and in support to make things bigger and bigger, because people feel if it's bigger, it's better. And you can walk into somewhere now and it's like a shopping mall. But I can tell you, it is deeply, deeply isolating. The synergies should be no more than about 12, 14 people in each cluster. So if we do that, if we then actually create, for example, these sort of these rectangles could represent assisted living or extra care or an individual room with an ensuite facility. If we organise those living areas around the type of space which we've been describing for multi-activity use during the day, you can end up with an excellent scenario whereby you have short distances of travel, direct lines of sight. The people doing the supporting don't have to go down corridors and upstairs and round corners. Everything happens right in front of you. And therefore, all the assisted technologies are actually, I don't say they're redundant, but their purpose is made far, far more effective. And also, there's a good synergy between inside and out. You must be able to see and be able to go freely from inside to out. And one of the other issues which is important is not to have abrupt transitions. Transitions for vulnerable people are deeply alarming. Some people cannot walk through a door. They cannot walk through a threshold for all kinds of reasons. So to make that easy, it's important to allow someone to express their self. So think of the hotel corridor and being abroad and not being able to understand the language, and that fear which we've all experienced of stepping out of your bedroom into the public space and you don't understand which end of the corridor to walk down, let alone all the rest of what's going to happen during that day. Well, it's very similar for someone who's been anxious for a long time. So if we make a transition space outside between the activity space and your private space, it assists enormously in developing confidence. So what we could do is end up with, say, a two-story residential building which has this multi-activity space on both floors and access to the outside on both floors. It's a model which we are absolutely convinced will work very, very effectively. A little bit about modern methods of construction. We have these phenomenal systems now of special steels which allow vast spans. We have these extraordinary computer-generated building design systems where you can design the whole building beforehand. And that means that instead of care buildings or support buildings being actually quite a complicated business to put together with their bricks and their blocks and all the bits and pieces, if actually we simply put up steel frames, this is a complicated one, but the principle holds. Here it is actually being assembled on site, so that everything is cut and ready to go, and it's simply bolted together like a Meccano set, and you can introduce other assistive technologies such as engineered rafters and so on. Here's an example of the real thing. You can put together these buildings very, very fast. So what we're talking about here is a frame which would enclose the environment which we've described to you. Folks living in their rooms have good orientation. They know where they are in relation to the rest of the environment outside. They can see directly. There's no travel down corridors. There's no reason to be disorientated. From your room, you can see what is going to happen today and every day. There's excellent orientation out to the outside. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of outside, but what there is should be useful. I'll explain why in a minute. Wherever you go within this space, you have excellent views. No one gets lost. People who are providing the support can see where everybody is. It's a small group, 14, 15 people, wherever you move. These are some examples of real scenarios which I visited. There are the threshold spaces. There's a nice picture of a lady, you're all familiar with that, someone outside in the sun, abroad, outside her house, very proud, full of self-confidence, and expressive of her personality. That's how it should be. Different sized spaces to do different kinds of group activity, larger group activities. We've done this, it actually happens, and it works brilliantly. And spaces where you can get up and have a dance spontaneously. Someone might remember a song. You can immediately pick it up on the internet and make it happen. And there's a party all of a sudden. I actually participated in one in Toronto. It was magic. And of course, the great outdoors. Not a pretty garden. I mean, it can be pretty, but it's got to be somewhere where you can actually do stuff. Pot plants, cut the plants, smell the roses, muck out the chickens, all that kind of thing. And of course, sit under the grapes when the sun's shining. So that is the model which we are proposing and we are developing gradually. And we wonder whether it might be appropriate in Shropshire as a way of bringing communities back together. There are wonderful assistive technologies, but in the end, we all love being together on an equal basis, having a lot of fun. And in the places that I saw abroad, there was real joy. And these are people who very often marginalized in our world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me go around that side. You had the most hypnotically brilliant voice, William. I think I could listen to you for hours, and your stories are completely fascinating, so thank you. That is William and Roland McMorran, Architectonicus Limited, which I thought was quite brilliant. Now, I'm well aware that the Hayden Smith Room is full at the moment and that people will be coming through to see Maggie Philbin OBE and the key ingredients of innovation at 3:15, which probably gives you time to nip to the bathroom, to grab yourself that last cup of coffee, to go and see the one thing that you wanted to see and to make your way back in here by 3:15, or just stay and relax and chill. But we'll greet Maggie in about 15 minutes. I just don't want the people in the Hayden Smith Room to miss the start of it. That's what's important. So we'll give it 15 minutes.